Welcome everyone to another Truth Talks. I am your host, Ed Genesis, and today we are talking about mixed race in today's world. We have an amazing panel as usual, people that's going to bring it and bring that Truth Talks. Before we go into the introductions, I am going to read the touch tones, which is a way that we ground ourselves before having deep conversations, just a way that we have agreement with one another. So these are the touchdowns. I was not ready. Sorry. And you know what? I'm telling today because it's not that I'm not always ready. The touch tones sometimes are on the screen and sometimes I read them. And so today, that's why I wasn't ready. So, but y'all bear with me. Here we go. And the touch tones are be 100% present, extending and presuming welcome. No language of the soul is privilege over any other language of the soul. Listen deeply. Listen intently and without interruption to what is said. Listen to the feelings beneath the words. Listen to another soul into life. Always by invitation. Even though you all are part of the panel, it's not mandatory that you share. If it's a question you want to pass over, something that you don't want to bring, you don't have to. No fixing, no saving, and no advising. Suspend judgment and acknowledge emotions. Identify assumptions. Our assumptions are usually invisible to us, yet they undergird our worldview and thus our decisions and actions. By identifying our assumptions, we can then set them aside and open our viewpoints to greater possibilities. Speak your truth. Say what is in your heart, trusting that your voice will be heard and your contribution respected. Respect it, respect and learn from silence. When things get difficult, turn to wonder. If you find yourself disagreeing with another, becoming judgmental, or experiencing challenging emotions, try turning to wonder. I wonder what brought her to this place. I wonder what my reaction teaches me about me. I wonder what he is feeling right now. Maintain confidentiality. Even though this is a public forum, we still don't want to repeat other people's conversations and take them back to friends, colleagues, so on and so forth. And last but not least, trust the process, your own heart, and the hearts of other members of the circle. With that, again, my name is Ed Genesis. I am the host of Truth Talks. This is a platform where we have real conversations with TRHT, which is Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, Kalamazoo. So it's not just about discussing racism, but finding ways that we can actually transform racism. Shouts out to Shalana Lewis. Shouts out to retired Captain Stacy Ledbetter, who was the co-creator with myself for Truth Talks. And shouts out to Emily Oliveras for being on the tech and always having so much dope support for us. With that, I would like to have the panelists introduce themselves if you can, starting with Angela if we can. And then you could just popcorn it to the next person.
Hi, my name is Angela Oliveras, and I am a Mexican-American Muslim. I'm a mother and a wife, and I hope that you learn from my story today. Thank you.
Okay, and on my screen next, I see Jen. So Jen, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Hey all, I'm Jen Haymas. I'm a Community Investment Officer at the Kalamazoo Community Foundation, also a mother and a partner and an educator for life. And I do work with TRHT Ed Design Team. So also looking forward to speaking to you all today. And I'm going to pass it to Kama.
Evening all. Kamatai Mitchell, I use she, her pronouns. I am the founder and executive director or CEO of Rooted Enrichment Center, a lead practitioner for the racial healing cohort for TRHT, and also a mama, which is probably the best job ever. Thanks for having me today. Jacob.
Hey, peace, everybody. Happy Eid to those celebrating. Jacob Mabry Penny Johnson, fourth generation Kalamazoo resident and father too. Community activist, been involved in kind of the social service nonprofit sector in Kalamazoo for some years. Really passionate about social justice, racial justice, anti-oppression work, and getting free, period. And really excited about this conversation around being mixed race or mixed identity. And Brother Eric, you next. Sound like, I don't know if it's just me or I'm not able to hear.
You're muted, Eric. It's unmuted, but we can't hear you.
That's it. I know, just working it a few minutes ago.
Technology is one of the devil tricks. At least that's how I feel. I'm not technical savvy at all. We're gonna circle back, Eric, and we're going to ask, how do you identify? Because I think it's something else. Emily and I were talking, and I said I think it's something else that society would ask such a question, and then it's suggestive, as if to say, I'm not mixed with anything. So starting with that, I just would like to ask, the flat out question is, how do you identify? Society says you're mixed or whatever, but how do you identify? And Kama, we had that great conversation on colorism, and we went deep. But we just scratched the surface. We know that. How do you identify?
Great question. I identify as a Black woman. I was raised in Black culture, and when we were chatting up a little bit before going live, that's something that Angela and I were talking about. Like, identity is a tricky thing in America, and a lot of it has to do with where, how, and by whom you're raised. And so I identify as a woman of color, Black woman. I don't know. Like, and it sometimes changes, right? It changes based on the time of life, the season of life I'm in. And I remember being raised by a Black father and a white mother, being very colorblind. Like, we're all humans, equal, equity across the board, and being appreciative of being raised in that way, with justice as the forefront of not judging people by how they look or where they come from. But also, being colorblind takes away from true lived experiences of people. And so that's the tricky part, coming of age and becoming a parent of two Black sons. Like, I raised them in Black culture. I was raised in Black culture, and that's how I identify, even though DNA tells me otherwise. So that's my answer. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. And I appreciate that segue, because I'm gonna pick on Jen Haymoss with this one, because there's another side. And the other side is, wait a minute, I'm actually proud. And I've seen a sense of pride come through to say, well, this is who I am. This is my identity. And I thought that was kind of dope. And so that's not society actually putting that on you, but somebody celebrating my ancestry and also who I am completely. By no means answering for you, Jen, but just that segue of that balance is because I saw you show up like that. How do you identify?
Yeah, thank you. I have pretty much always identified as biracial. I didn't say it like that. I would say like mixed, or when I was in high school and I felt kind of like ashamed because you always feel different anyway. I would say I was a mutt. And I never even thought when I was that age that I thought it was funny because I felt uncomfortable. I didn't think that I was being like derogatory towards myself, and that internalized racism, which I'll probably talk about again. But I think like I very proudly have said like I'm biracial, I'm Filipino or Filipina and white, and have very proudly like claimed that part of my culture. And yeah, I think if you've spoken to me about some of the background of my family before, you know that the way that my family came to be wasn't like traditional. It was very much based and rooted in colonialism, because you have a white man who like goes to an Asian country to find that like Asian wife and all the things that come along with that. So I used to, like when I was even younger than high school, say I was Asian. I just always said that, and then it was like, okay, I'm mixed, and now it's really like I am very proudly biracial, and yeah, that's how I identify. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and thank you for that that backdrop of saying, you know, just the details with that, because I'm sure we'll go a little deeper into that in a minute. Eric, welcome back. And is your audio? How's that? Still can't hear you. Wonder what's that? Okay, try one more time. Yep, keep it going. So Jacob, how do you identify?
Yes. Man, as I was listening and when I've heard, when I think about that question, I'm like, dang, that's a like profound question. Who are we? How do we identify? Like, who are we? And a lot of times I feel like, you know, society decides that for us, especially when we talk about race and racism, like birth certificate, you know what I mean? How do you identify racially? School, how do you identify racially? And asking me, I'm like, oh man. So I'm the son of David Johnson and Susan Penny. My father's an African-American, born here in Kalamazoo. And my mother was born in Gun Lake. She's, you know, ethnicity-wise, French, Canadian, Irish, or otherwise known as white or Caucasian. So I identify, or have throughout my life, as kind of like Canvas said, you know, kind of like different. You know, I identify as a man of color. I identify as a biracial man, and I identify as a Black man. And I will say that I've had issues and struggle with how I identify, specifically racially, being biracial and mixed race. And I think even this conversation is just so huge, and it's, to be honest, something that I'm still, you know, gaining like for real clarity on. Just knowing that we live in a racialized society, and I want to just be like, I am who I am, or I am that I am. But most of the time, I just identify as a man of color, because my understanding is like the way racism works is this kind of, you know, whiteness in other. So I identify as a person of color, but I also realize that like it's way deeper than that. When we talk about colorism, but yeah, that's a deep question, man. Is as simple as it is. It's like it's deep.
It is, and I thank you for your answer on that, and the ways that you weaved around. But on the point. So you hit all of the details around your personal struggles, which I know will go deeper because you already know you and Cameron were like some of the first names to where I told Emily, I don't want to always pick on them for stuff like this, but both of y'all said very real things offline that led to us having these conversations in the first place. Angela, I purposefully wanted you to go last because you said a mouthful when introducing yourself. And that was not just the mixed race, but you threw in some extra that identity-wise, I'm sure has been something to even proclaim that. And so thank you for your courage, for being here. And how do you identify?
I identify just as I said. I identify as a Mexican American Muslim. This has been a journey for me that I didn't even realize that I was on since I was a child. I grew up in a very, very white community, Vicksburg, Michigan, if you're familiar with it. And I was the colored girl at school. I had no idea that I was different than other people. People used to call me racial slurs, and I had no idea what those meant until I got older. As a young child, I would just say, I'm half Mexican, half white. And I was very proud to say that. I was very proud of my Mexican culture. Being Latina is not necessary. It's not technically a race. And so that, brings in its whole, like a whole other aspect of identification. And so I do see myself as a colored woman. And I think that I have been able to really focus on learning my identity just in these past couple of years. I started nursing school, and I was able to identify just through a lot of my coursework in school the fact that my Hispanic culture was really a huge component of who I am. And I felt comfortable saying that, yes, I am a woman of color. And I felt that I by understanding myself through reading, I felt like it was okay for me to use that term for myself. And it took a long time to get there. I think it's been a difficult road for me because of the fact that I converted to Islam when I was 21 years old. This brought in a whole other cultural group. I did wear the headscarf for almost 13 years. And so when people saw me, it was, wait a minute, you're not Arab? You're Mexican? Wait a minute. No, that doesn't make sense. And so I went through this whole other journey in my life of how can I be Mexican American and be Muslim? And it was about 2.5 years ago, I took a trip to Spain, and it really all kind of came together for me and said, I can be Mexican American and Muslim, because this is really going back into history and seeing that there are a lot of people who are just like me, and I do have a group that I fit into.
Wow. Thank you all for, you all just didn't answer it. Like Brother Jacob said, it's a simple question, but you all didn't answer it in a simple way. You actually went into depth. Like, I identify now as this because of the journey. And I really appreciate you all sharing the journey. Every time Jacob introduces himself, he says, I am the son of, and he says his parents like that in such a powerful way. And I just love that. I think that's dope. Before going into this next question, there's something that I want to share with you all. My first cousin and I, Chris, were just talking over the weekend, and I shared this with Emily. And I think you can, yeah. So that picture is of my great-great-grandfather and my great-great-grandmother. My great-great-grandfather, full-blooded Cherokee. period. My great grandmother, Choctaw Native American from down by Mississippi. They were dark skinned. I had to do my research. And my cousin and I were just talking, and I said, you know, I grew up in Gary, Indiana, predominantly Black. And we always knew my great grandmother. We either called her mother because she was literally the mother of everything. She was our oldest ancestor and gave us a lot of rich history. Or we called her granny affectionately, even though she was my great grandmother. And I told him, I said, man, you know, two things messed me up. Like, one, growing up in a predominantly Black city where it was hard to articulate that I have Native American in my family, because the first thing was, where your hair doesn't look like you have Indian in your family. That's how we said it then. Like, I have Indian in my blood, you lying. And everybody said that, you know. So growing up, you shelf that and you just identify with the closest, like camera lifted up. My culture is Black. That's how I grew up. And that's what I knew. But as I got older and we started talking and we started having family conversations, I realized that we erased, not purposefully, we just didn't know. But we erased a lot. And so he just broke those pictures out over this last weekend, and him and I and a few other family members were talking. And I said, well, how do we tell this story? So I wanted to share my story today of, yes, I am a Black man, but if you open up the books, I guess I would be considered mixed as well within America. And then it makes me ask, who's not in America? So that a physical attribute that people look at, is it a good hair versus bad hair thing? Goes back into that colorism type of stuff. And before going into this next question, I want to welcome Eric Shelley back. And is everything still not? Let's see. Nope. Looks like no. You might have stay on and hit the chat, or I don't know what's wrong, because you were sounding, everything was good at first. This next question is, have you ever felt pressure to identify one way more than another? And that's why I wanted to share my little backdrop before asking that. And I have to go to Brother Jacob on this one first. Have you ever felt the pressure to identify one way or another?
Yeah, for sure. Without a doubt, many a times. And so much to unpack in terms of how we identify around race, being mixed race in America, and for me right here in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And although I think my parents were somewhat race conscious, like conscious of the system of race and how it impacts us, I still feel like there was not a lot of conversations that were had that helped me necessarily navigate that at an early age. And I can remember it really early in social circles. So growing up in Kalamazoo, you know, friends and family, mixed race. You know, I grew up across the street from my grandfather, who was African American, and just had like a lot of family interaction. The school I went to in elementary school was predominantly white. I was probably one of 10 people of color. And I can remember having some real identity issues and kind of correlating certain things with whiteness, like certain things being like money and comfort. And it, you know, at an early age, kind of going to a private school, I remember like looking back, making some some assumptions about what it is to be white and what it is to be non-white. And I can remember wanting to be white, just straight up. Like, I'll just keep it all the way real with y'all. To the extent of like having some identity issues and coming to my mother, dang near like, yo, I want my hair to be straight. I want the skater cut. And I think that was pressure that I was giving myself, but it was also just being in different environments, and a lot of the whiteness or white people that are around were like affluent and living good, and not necessarily the same as the folks in the neighborhood where I was living. And I think that was a huge part for me. But then also is, I can remember dealing with institutions. My mother has stories of having to go to KPS with my brother specifically, not me, but like re-identify his race. Like, yo, no, hold up. He does identify as a youth of color. He's not white, right? And like there being some stuff around that. I can remember having some interactions with the police at a young age, and them straight up asked me, like, how do you identify? Do you consider yourself a Black man? Do you consider yourself a man of color? And me kind of being like, yeah. But I also feel like, thankfully enough, that a lot of my family and upbringing didn't necessarily put a lot of pressure on me, and I think really accepted me for who I was in terms of just racial identity. But I think really when I started having to engage, with institutions, like I said, kind of school, health, police, I could kind of feel a little bit more of that pressure. But, family, not so much. I think I put some pressure on myself, though, through some social circles at an early age, though, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for all of the things that you lifted up. That's a heavy process. And I just want to say, don't put that on yourself, though. Shows like Different Strokes, Saved by the Bell, like who didn't want to be white?
Yeah.
Shows and seeing like the coolest people on TV were white, and Good Times was what it was, and what saved Arnold and Willis was this white man, and even the songs say, now the world don't move to the beat of just one drum. What might be right for some, y'all know how it go, but they say a man with means. And then these other two got nothing but the clothes on their back, basically. And it's Different Strokes. And I took that to mean what you said, Jacob. I was like, Different Strokes. I mean, white people have money and Black people don't. Because
Yeah, and if I can, I just want to input. I don't want to talk too much. And then I think there was a sway, right, where getting a little bit more comfortable, and then really wanted to embrace a lot of the African American side, and kind of neglecting some of my mother's Caucasian side. So I think there was a shift for me right around middle school where it was like, all right,
yeah,
let me embrace this fully and kind of forget about some.
By the time the Cosbys hit the TV, it was a gap. It was a big gap. But by the time the Cosbys hit the TV and people were a little more conscious, and we started seeing the rap was going that way a little bit too. Yeah, everybody wanted a Black African medallion or plaits in their hair or something like that. I remember it switching. And I was like, wow, okay, it's cool. I got a fat nose and big lips then. It's okay. Because before that, I got teased by other Black people, and that's just something else. But Eric, you back? Still? Okay, we're going to keep working with it. Jen, have you ever felt the pressure of identifying one way or another?
Yeah, I think that really started happening as I got older. So I'm from Saginaw, Michigan, which is a very diverse place, but it's almost similar to how like Portage and Kalamazoo are. So you have like Saginaw City and then like Township. And like the Township of Saginaw is kind of like how Portage would be here. And so we lived in the city of Saginaw, and we lived on a block or a whole neighborhood that was like Mexican. So everyone in the neighborhood thought all of my siblings and I were Mexican, and we would be like, we're not. And so I'd be like, I'm Asian. And they were like, no, you're not. I was like, okay. And I just would say, yep, I'm Mexican too. So it's just kind of funny because when Angela was younger and I was younger, like late teens and early 20s, we met, and everyone, we would tell people we were sisters all the time, and they would be like, yeah, you are. So I just remember those things. And again, a lot of times it was like humor, because I just felt that pressure. It's like, I joke with one of my other biracial friends about being ambiguously ethnic. Like, we talk about it all the time, like in a joking way. But in a lot of ways, that's kind of how I floated through my life. You know, I knew that I wasn't white. I didn't get treated like I was white. I had all these experiences, but a lot of times people didn't know, like, and I know a lot of people who are also biracial who are asked, like, what are you? I got asked that. Whew, I can't even tell you how many times that happened. In Saginaw, I was a waitress, and I would like go up to the table and they'd be like, hello, miss, what are you? And I was like, oh, I like never knew how to respond. Every time it happened, I like still didn't know how to respond. And I think that just led me to when BIPOC became a more popular term, or saying you're a person of color, I felt like so much comfort in that, because I was like, well, I love that. Like, I want to say that instead of always saying like Asian, because I also sometimes didn't feel like I really was Asian, you know. I loved like when people would say biracial, and when people would say, like I said, person of color, which became like BIPOC. All those like as those phrases have evolved, I have evolved too in following those trends of saying that. I think when I was at the institution, like working at a larger institution, I was referring to myself as a person of color, and a white person who worked there was like, no, you're not. And I was like, oh, I'm not. And they were like, no, you're white. Like, you talk white, you could look white, you could pass white. If I saw you in a room, I think you were white. And again, that was a time where I was like, I don't know how to respond to this. And as I've like gone more into my journey, it's a lot easier to do. But there are those times where you just feel pressure, because in that moment inside, I'm like, I'm not white. Like, and that's such a hard part of myself to claim, that white part of myself. And I just only in the last couple of years have been really like thinking about how I am white. Like half of me is. Just having kids, I think, has really made that happen for me. But yeah, I just have felt pressure at times to be like, yep, I am white. I'm not really a person of color, even though inside I'm like, yes, I am. So it's a hard journey like that, just working through all those things, how mean kids can be. And when they tell you something, even when I was a teacher, I was 22 when I started teaching high school, and I had high schoolers be like, you're Black. And I was like, I am. And again, it was like that thing where I'm like, I'm Black, I'm Mexican, I don't know what I am. And it's like, I'm biracial, and I'm Filipino and white. And it was just always having to like be able to say that so that people would just know, like, that's who I am.
You lifted up some, yeah, y'all keep hitting it, and I appreciate that, because we have to have these type of conversations, because there's youngsters right now struggling with everything that we're talking about right now. Before going over to you, Angela, I want to lift up some of the things that you were saying, Jen, like that. People say you don't look like this. You don't look this, or you don't look that. And Emily and I were talking, they have a TikTok out. And so there's a Black woman, and she's married to an Asian man. They have 4 kids. And she said this is the weirdest thing, and it's hilarious, but it's also it brings about awareness to the topic that we're talking about now. So her first 2 young men, they look like the perfect blend of the mother and the father. There's, you just genetically, that's how it came out. But their last 2, she said, now this is where it gets weird. The last baby looks completely Black, like is dark skinned, darker than she is, and looks like he has no Asian whatsoever. His older brother, who's only 10 or 11 months older than him, looks completely Asian, is lighter than everybody in the house. That's how our ancestry works. genetics, DNA. That's how it goes. And so there's a level of ignorance when people actually say that you don't look a certain way or certain things like that. And I just want to throw that tidbit in because when Angela was talking earlier, it sounded like the same thing. Well, how can you be this if you're this and you don't look this, or you look this? And have you ever felt pressure to identify one way or another, Angela?
When Jen spoke, I felt like her and I have lived the same exact life. And also, in you talking about having children, I didn't grow up looking like my mother. My mom is light-haired, light-skinned, bright blue eyes. And my son was born, and he had blonde hair, very fair skin. And my husband is very, very dark complected Arab. And then we have a daughter as well, and she looks exactly like both of us. There's something to be said about having a child that looks like you. And I think also looking like your mother. There's something about, I don't know what it is, but there's something about looking like your mother that's really important, I think, maybe especially to a girl. I don't know. But I would say that, yes, I have felt pressured. And my parents went through a very ugly divorce when I was young, and I looked like my father's side of the family, more so than any of my siblings. And my grandmother hated my father. And a lot of that was taken out on me because I looked like him. And so I did feel pressured within my own family to act a certain way or to behave a certain way that helped me to identify more or to be more accepted by my white grandmother. That was really hard as a child, and that was something that I remember having a lot of conversations with my mother about. And she would admit it. She would say, it's because you look like your father. And she just can't accept that. She loves you, but you remind her too much of your father. And so I had to work extra hard on my relationship with her and proving that I was a good child and that I was worthy of her love. And as I got older, I think a lot of the groups that I fit into or the groups that I found myself spending time with, it was as though I felt like I never completely belonged. I was almost there, but I wasn't. I was still just a little bit different than everybody. And I couldn't really ever understand what that was. And just like Jen had said, white girls would say, "Oh, you're white, you're just one of us." It's like, not really. I'm not completely white. Yes, that's part of me, but it's not all of me. And then when I would hang out with Hispanics, it's like, "Oh, you're not Hispanic, like you can't speak Spanish." And that's another huge component of it is, how Mexican are you? And never being fully Mexican enough. And so growing up, it was like, okay, if I can't speak Spanish, then what other ways can I prove that I'm Mexican? And so I learned how to cook, and I can cook anything you want. And so that was one way for me to show that, yes, I am Mexican. And it is still something that I want to journey on in learning the Spanish language. That will help me, I think, in my identity process to feel more confident in my identification. I think it's a really important thing that I would like to pass on to my daughter, as that identity is like essentially kind of breeding out. I want to make sure that she is able to hold on to a piece of that. And I still have people. I remember being in Saudi Arabia. We had just made our pilgrimage, and this is a pilgrimage to Mecca where everybody from every corner of the world comes. Every race, color, doesn't matter. It's probably one of the most diverse experiences you can have in your life. And I remember getting in a taxi cab after this pilgrimage, and the taxi driver said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm American. I'm Mexican American." He said, "No, you're not." And I said, "Oh, okay." I said, I am Mexican American." He said, "I swear to God, you're Egyptian." I said, "I'm not Egyptian." And I said, "I'm Mexican American." He said, "I swear to God, you are lying to me. You are Egyptian. If you're not Egyptian, you're Syrian." I said, "No, I am Mexican American." And he would not believe anything that I had to say about where I came from. And finally, I just had to throw my hands up in the air and say, "Okay, fine, I'm Egyptian." And just like Jen had said, so it was a lot, it's been a lot of that throughout my life. Even, we just moved to a new neighborhood, and it's slightly diverse. But my husband is Arab, and so most people think that I'm Arab because he is. So, an Arab wouldn't marry outside of their culture, right? So it's often assumed that that's what I am, and so I make it a point to say, no, I'm Mexican American. My mom is white. My dad is Mexican, and so I talk a lot about race to try to kind of open that door to let people know that it doesn't just have to be one way, So.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of interesting things. Before going over to you, Kama, I just want to say I'm married to the beautiful Vice Mayor, Patrice Griffin, and we went to New York, and everybody we ran across told her she was not Black. Like so many people stopped us and just to ask what she was. I even got a lot of that in New York because it's so diverse. So I got Dominican, Cuban, and I was just like, I'm Black. And she had to argue with a person similar to you, Angela, because this young lady was like, "No, I know you're Dominican." She was like, "I'm not. My mother's Black, my father's Black." So I get that. I think there's a little love in that. And if we can reverse that part, to see the identity instead of the differences, then there can be more embracing, and we can see that in order to mistake somebody for a whole nother race, there's a connection in that. There's I know a guy, Modesto, Dano, you all know Dano Orpeza, Adelante Dano. His father, Modesto, is dark, and does not speak English. And it blew my mind the first time that we had a conversation with. And it also opened my mind up to, wow, so if you look like one of my uncles, then I mean we can all be related. You know what I mean? And then you just peel back those layers. If everybody looks like somebody, in which we all do, and there's different hues in all of the different races, if we look for the more things that connects us as opposed to what divides us, then we wouldn't chip people apart the way we do. And I have to lift this up, Jen, because I'm learning. So we all are taught that kids are mean, but I am learning that they come from dysfunctional households where their parents are either ignorant or they are the mean ones that's teaching the kids. And that's the only reason why we go to school and then say some of the horrendous things that we have said to other kids. Because it's like, we don't do this in my house. Why are you doing that? And I even remember religions being, people being ousted just for a religion that their parents are raising them in. And it's like, you sanctified, you can't wear pants. And it's the joke of gym hour. Yeah, it's a lot of those things. So Kama, any pressure to identify one way or another?
So much of everybody's story resonates with me. It's so interesting, whether Mexican, Filipino, or commonality between Jacob and I. And I also want to lift up TikTok. Like there's this big thing going on. Like if you have a black mom and a white dad, you're raised completely different. You're a whole different kind of mixed. And I'm like, really? Is that a thing? I just wanted to put that out there. I have thoughts about that. When we think about like even DNA, like you lifted up, Ed, about the Asian and black family, even like the matriarch, the mitochondrial DNA goes back through the mother. And so there's a lot of theory now that you have to identify what your mother is based on the mitochondria DNA when you talk about epigenetics. We're not going to go there though. I'm sure, Angela, you've heard about some of that stuff too in your nursing, but I've had different points of pressure in my life. I went to kindergarten here in Kalamazoo, and then for 1st through 6th grade, I was in Texas. And I went to a very diverse, bussed-in Montessori school. So quite often I was mistaken as Mexican American, but also a whole lot of, what are you? What are you? And my DNA results say I'm 18 different ethnicities. So I'm very much a mutt, as Jen says. I joked about that often. I think it's working, Eric. I joked about that.
So,
Awesome. Can't wait for you to jump in after I talk. I talked about that quite often growing up, about I can fit into almost everything. I've been mistaken as Brazilian, Latina, Puerto Rican. And when I was 19, right after I graduated from high school, I moved to New York. And I remember walking through Yonkers, New York, where it's high Dominican, Puerto Rican, and Black men speaking to me in Spanish. And I was like, that's a whole thing? Because all I knew were Mexican Americans, like Mexicans from Mexico growing up in Texas. And so that was like a whoo. And then that's when I really started delving into culture and identity and how people move and show up. I have an aunt, my dad's eldest sister, who specifically literally told me to my face that I had to choose. I really had to choose which side. And that was really shocking to me, to even someone to literally, a loved one, tell me that I had to choose when I didn't even know that I could. Like, how do I choose? I wasn't raised closely with my mom's family, so I really identify strongly with my father's family, who I live around and grew up around every summer. But I never felt like I was going to ever disown my mom's family. Those are still my people. Those are my ancestral lines. And if you look at a picture of my grandmother young in my high school graduation picture, my white, Swedish, English grandmother, we look so much alike that it's amazing, like those specific 2 pictures. And I love that. I really love that. But I also really, really love when people look at the Mitchells around town and say, all of you have the same smile. I love that too. And so I've been pressured different times in my life, but I never cracked under the pressure. I feel like who I am is so multifaceted, and there's no way I can choose ever one thing or the other. I believe I choose my culture, but I will never just say that I'm one thing over the other. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you for that. Eric, introduce yourself, please. And how do you identify? You can introduce yourself and jump straight into how do you identify.
Okay. Yeah. My name's Eric. He, him, his. I work with Ed at Michigan United. And I identify as Afro-Norwegian, I suppose you'd say. Yeah, I remember growing up, my dad telling me, it doesn't really matter what you consider yourself. The world is going to see you the way that they see you. Even if you think you're white, you walk into the wrong neighborhood, they're going to see you the way that they see you. And I found that to be true. And that goes both ways. We obviously in the Black community have colorism issues, and I've not been seen as being totally Black in those circumstances, and certainly in white environments, Like, no, you're not white. So, I mean, I know who I am. And I don't feel a need to explain that to anyone, but I also understand I become what I am perceived to be.
I love that answer. I love that, especially that echoes what Brother Jacob lifted up earlier. Like I am what I am. Like yeah, and that's it. So I'm gonna keep it on you for a minute, Eric, and ask this next question: have you ever experienced racism within your own family, and how did that feel, if so?
Well, yeah, and my parents were married in the middle in the early 60s, which is, you know, before the civil rights, before the Loving decision. I mean, it was illegal for them to be married in some states. My grandfather was Norwegian. I don't mean of Norwegian ancestry. I mean like right off the boat speaking Norwegian. And my mother's relationship with my grandfather was always tense. And when she got married to a black man, it was like, that was it. I'm disowning you. And they didn't speak again for 20 years or so. And then one day, 1975 or so, they both said, you know, this is silly, and wrote letters apologizing, and they crossed in the mail. And then the next summer, we were on a boat, and we took a European vacation, just like the National Lampoon movie, and ended up in north of the Arctic Circle when the sun never set all summer.
That is a fascinating story, especially how the letters cross. That just really made me. So you started off talking about the ugliness of racism, but the healing within that, and I just appreciate you for lifting that up. That was dope. Jacob, have you ever felt racism within your own family? So how did that feel?
Yeah. Yes, and so I think Eric just reminded me. So my parents were both born in like 1945. My mother was 37, 38, 39. Sorry, my bad. When she had me. And so they both grew up in the 60s. My father was a Vietnam veteran. My mother was straight up like a flower child, like took her financial aid check from Western and was in California in 67. So having parents who grew up pre-1967, like Eric said, like before 1967, in some places in America, it was illegal to have interracial marriages. So like, let's be clear on that first off. In 1967, in parts of America, it was illegal to marry outside of your race. And so I can remember there being some similar vibes that I didn't necessarily experience or witness, but that I heard about in terms of my mother and my father when they got together, and how some of my mother's family accepted or didn't accept my father. My father, being a Vietnam veteran, I think gave him a little pass fighting for the country. And that being said, yeah, I can remember visits with cousins when I was young with my brother, and being straight up called the N-word by cousins, and being like, yo, cousins being like, yo, my dad said, yeah, y'all, you know what I mean? Then just like some stuff popping off, and me being too young, but my brother being a little bit older and kind of coming home to mom and dad and talking about it. And we ain't go visit them cousins anymore, like straight up. So there was a little bit of that. But outside of that, not so much. You know, my mother did the best she could. My mother and father got divorced when I was probably around 11. My father was still very active in my life, so I was very connected to his side of the family. And my mother did the best she could to support me culturally, you know, raising someone who's like who was identified as a black man by society, and being a white woman, and there just being some stuff that she just didn't understand there. And to be real, I can remember my mother saying some stuff that kind of caught me way off guard. in regards to being a brown man with a beard in America, right? Post 9/11. And there just being some comments from my own mother that was like, whoa, are you like, you trying to hold on? So every brown man with a beard is a terrorist and like that type stuff. So, you know, I feel like having the experience of being biracial is a constant, like one thing that I'm hearing with folks is like there's constant conversations, and it feels like we are constantly like reminded of our racial ambiguity. I like the word that somebody used earlier. I think it was Jen, racial ambiguity. But our biracialness or mixed raceness, and that is like I feel like I'm constantly having conversations. So yeah, you know, not so much, but there was a few incidences for sure, without a doubt.
Thank you for that. And some of the things you lifted up takes me back to what Angela was saying earlier. And so I remember growing up, and depending on what I did, that was my father's side of the family. So if I did something wrong or was in the streets or something like that, my mama say, well, that's your father. These type of things, when that's race, it's like that's the black side or that's the white side of you coming out. That's a whole different conversation and a whole different hurt. And I only know that because a friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine, just told me some different things just from being biracial. And I was like, wow, I never looked at it like that. I was only told you're being like your father. But if I was told I'm being like my black father from a white mother, then that would be like, well, what are you saying about black people as a whole? And it's not defending anybody that thinks like that or teaches that. But again, I think it goes back to what we discussed during colorism, which is sometimes parents try to protect their children from further hurt that they've seen. And so they say, don't go over there because, you know, and it comes out wrong a lot of times, more times than not. But sometimes that underlying message is love. And it just, in this world, is hard. Like no different than me being a father and teaching my boys fight. I don't want them to be violent, but I don't want them to be bullied and ran over. And in this world, I've seen some things that makes me say, maybe not turn the other cheek, maybe know how to defend yourself. And I know that was a little off scale, but that's just where my mind went to those differences being pushed on you like that. Kama, have you ever felt racism or experienced racism within your own family, and how did that make you feel?
Yeah, actually from both sides, which is, well, it's not racism coming from a black side. We all know the definition of racism, but prejudiced. So similar to Jacob or Eric's share a little bit, my mom grew up in a small northern town in the UP of Michigan, where there's one other family of color, biracial, black father, white mother, had two sons. The only people of color she saw, she was 12. And she took a trip to Green Bay, Wisconsin, shopping, and saw more black people and was like, what is this whole thing, diversity thing? And fell in love with Soul Train in high school, and then decided I'm going to go to a college where there's black people and I can have soul music. And she was one of those type of white women. So we went to Northern Michigan University and met my father, and here I am. And I have a brother too. And so when I spent every summer on our blueberry farm. We have a farm, Bangor, black owned, 68 years. And one summer I was arguing with a little cousin who was a couple years younger than me. We were fighting all day about some BS, 11 and 8, kids fighting. I don't even remember what the fight is about. I just remember coming down the stairs and she turning around, looking at me and called me a honky. And I was like, what? And I punched her in her arm, and she went outside crying to her dad and my dad, who are brothers. And her dad was like, well, you kind of deserve that. You don't do that to your family. And she's not. And so we had to have this whole understanding of what genetics and race do, because she wasn't much darker than I was with straight hair also. But genetics make people show up a certain kind of way. And so my mom's dad disowned her when she had me until I was about 1.5 years. But because of how I present, it was a little bit easier for him to accept me into the family. Not so much my dad, but his grandkids. And every now and then growing up as children, because my mom's family was a little bit more affluent, which Jacob lifted up, whiteness, we sometimes think whiteness comes with money. I would get a little extra Christmas presents or birthday presents. My birthday falls in the summer, so I would get like packages from my aunties and my grandmothers on my white side to the farm, and some of my cousins would be very jealous. And it's not something that I could control. So the prejudice and the racism was very flux from both sides of the family, but it was there. But I would say overall, embraced by both sides of my family over the years, and feel very grateful to not have intense racism come from my white side, nor intense prejudice from my black side. Thank you.
Thank you. I love the fact that you didn't let your black side of the family off the hook. It was like, well, they was prejudiced though. Like, yeah, you called it out, and that's what's up. Jen, have you experienced racism within your own family, and how did it make you feel, if so?
You know, I think that because I really do feel like the way that my parents came together was racist, you know, like a white man looking through a catalog and being like, this one. So I feel like I didn't think about it that much, but when I was little. But when I look back, I think about how we could eat the food, but we couldn't speak the language. Like, he didn't want to learn it, so then none of us could learn it. Or if we were, you know, just pretending to speak Tagalog, it was like, no, you can't do that because I don't know what you're saying. Where if he were alive, I'd be like, can you not be so lazy? And like not be so afraid to learn a language? But yeah, those are things that when I think about it, our families were so small because, you know, you take someone from their family in another country and they don't talk to them anymore, really. So all you have is us. And there were 6 of us in my family. And his family was so small. And he was, you know, a lot older. He was like 26 years older than my mom. So you have like different generations. And so we were very small and isolated in that way, even though we had family in another country. So I felt like I didn't know that there was racism, like that was, you know, just it was under everything. And as I got older, I really thought about that. But that, you know, that was like my immediate family. I'm married to a white man who is beautiful. He's great. I love him so much. And when I met his family, I had never been around like all white people like that, in that way, because of I had really surrounded myself with a very like multicultural like friend group. And, you know, when I met his family, I'll never forget his grandma, you know, she was so much older. Like she passed away when she was in her 90s. And she would always say, oh, Jen's Oriental and Oriental this. And I'd be like, and it's hard because you're like, no, grandma. And she wasn't saying it in a hateful way, but that just showed that she just never had that knowledge of like, not to say that. And I think like, and if that's the worst I have experienced from his family, like, I think that's pretty good. But I also think about like within my family, I have half siblings who are a little bit older. And when Trump became president in 2016, all the racism of those white siblings, those white half siblings, came out like I had never experienced before. And they would post these awful things. And it was like, I never even thought about them that way. they would post these awful things on social media, and I would just get into these, like, you know, what everyone used to do in 2016 and 17 before they got too tired. Just get into these huge social media fights with my half siblings. And now we don't talk because I said to one of them, like, do you understand that I'm not white? Like, and you post this racist stuff, and I can't believe we're related. And when my half brother said to me, well, if our dad was alive, he'd be saying this too, I was like, bye. Like, I don't need you to be a family member to me anymore. So I think it was that piece of it too, where it's like you say you don't see color, but then you post things like that, and you're just like buying into this rhetoric that's so dangerous. And when everything with, that China virus phrase came out, he's posting the same stuff. Because even though I cut him out of my life, sometimes I'd be like, how racist is he today? I would just check on it. And when all of that rhetoric started, he was following along with that too, and just being like extremely hateful towards Asians. And it's like, how can you do that when you know that we share the same blood? So I think there's that piece of it. And I think with myself and my family, I talked about this a little bit, but you know, I'm still a new parent in a lot of ways. I have a 4-year-old and I have an 18-month-old, and they are very white. Like, they're so white that I went to the doctor with them with my first, and I was at Bronson and I was holding him, and my skin against his, you know, it looks like hot chocolate holding this kid. And the nurse asked me if I was his nanny when I went in to Bronson. And I just remember that internalized racism of being like, I like just trying to work through, like, am I not his mom? Like, I remember Campbell was there. I birthed him. Like, I remember it. But it's just these feelings where you, I think in these early years of parenthood, it's like a new journey in anti-racism, really thinking about that and how that plays out, especially because a lot of the times I'm afraid of white men. Like, I'm afraid of what they're going to say, how they're going to mansplain me, what's going to happen. And, you know, I'm married to a white man. I have these 2 sons that are very white looking. And it's like, wow, this is everything that I always felt like I didn't want to be around. And I still love them so much. So how do you deal with like your own internalized racism, or how I'm afraid people will like look at me and not think that I'm their mother? And those are things that I really am still working through. It makes me a little emotional, like my voice is shaking, but I thank you.
No, I thank you. Thank you for lifting up and you all been sharing such great stories along with your answers, and I really appreciate that, because it provides such an amount of clarity, so to speak. And Jen, you just said something that this is a little off scale, but I have to say this because I won't name the guy, but a white guy thought that it was cool to tell me a racist joke as long as it didn't have black people in it. And I said, man, you get that that's a racist joke though. And I don't want to hear it. And I said, I remember being taught those jokes growing up, black man, white man, Chinese man. And anytime a joke started like that, it had stereotypes and stuff like that. And he proceeded, no, you have to hear this. And it's not about black people, so it's not racist. And I said, wow, is that what you think? Like, I said, it's deeper than that. So we had to have a whole, ended up being like 15-minute conversation, because the first 10 minutes was a debate about if I'm not saying anything against black people as a white man, I'm not being racist. And I said, you can't believe that. Like, but he did. And I'm not saying his name for a reason, because you all probably know him. And he's growing, he's getting better, I believe, I hope. But it's just what you were lifting up, Jen, it just really pinged that. I remember that memory, like, and that was not too long ago, actually. And it was like, wow, we have a lot more education that we need to awareness and education, so people and I hate to say sensitivity classes, but like I got another word for it if we wasn't online, or what I call it. It's profane, but it's a way to it's a alternative for being quiet. So that's how I feel. Like if everybody just shut up, expletive, then world could be a little more peaceful, in my opinion, if people didn't bombard people with their thoughts and their opinions. Angela, you touched on a lot of it earlier, honestly, in some of your previous answers, but have you ever dealt with it, experienced it within your own family?
I think I have a lot to say on this one, so bear with me. My mom was very young. Both of my parents were very young when they got married. My mom was 16 and my dad was 19. My mom had a upbringing where she was your typical latchkey kid. She didn't have a lot of rearing from her parents. They also got divorced pretty early on. And I think that a lot of the racism was removed that could have been there because of the fact that she married into my father's family at such a young age. And I think that is why a lot of my identification, or me feeling comfortable identifying more as a Mexican woman, is because she actually adapted so much of the culture herself that she was able to teach us that. When they got married, my mom coming from a white family, my father being one of the only Mexican families in Kalamazoo at that time, it was very, very difficult. She got pregnant and she was sent away to, I don't know what they're called, convent, or, one of those birthing centers for teen mothers. And my grandma did everything that she could to keep my father away from my mother at that time. And it was my father sneaking off and going and visiting her at the fence, while she was in the courtyard and trying to talk to each other. And eventually my grandfather gave permission for my mother to marry my father. And so he went and he snuck her out of that facility and met my father and his mother at the courthouse and approved for my mother to marry him. My mom's mom ended up showing up at the courthouse. She found out, and she came and slugged my father right in the face in the courthouse. Her being a white woman, he went to jail, and she was able to very prim and properly walk out of the courthouse. My mom moved into the home of my grandmother, and they were able to, at that time, my sister had been born and was in foster care for about 2 months, and they were able to get her. And so then my sister was raised with my grandmother in the home and with my father. And there's a lot of time that my mother's mom did not speak to her, and it was just very, very hostile for many years. Never really went away. And so when I decided to get married to an Arab man, a man from Saudi Arabia, I went to my family and told them that the guy that I had been dating for a while and I had decided that we wanted to get married. And I thought that because of the history within my family, that my family would be very accepting of this. Not at all. This was the worst thing that I could have done to my family. I was called by almost every single one of my extended family members on my father's side, and I was told not to get married. This was the worst decision that I could have been making. It was a disgrace to the family. I was losing my identity. I was turning my back on them. I was destined to an eternity of hell, and And I would never, and I was going to be taken to Saudi Arabia and kidnapped and never allowed to talk to my family again, and I would become his slave. That was the reaction from my family. And so I had to do a lot of reading about the religion, about the culture, and try to be able to stand my own ground when I was having conversations with them. And it really took years for my family to feel comfortable with him and to realize that he was not going to kidnap me, that he was not going to take me away to his country and turn me into his slave. When I started wearing the headscarf, it was a decision that I had made, but that was ultimately blamed on my husband. And it was something that he must have made me do. He must have forced me into. And it's always been a lot of having to prove, like, no, these are my choices. This is my decision. This is what I want. There was a time when I felt that my family had finally accepted me as being Muslim. And then we just kind of had a falling out, and somebody told me, I had made a comment about how I didn't want negativity around my family. I didn't want negativity or harm around my children. And somebody turned to me and said, that's not true. You're raising them in that religion. So it just came fully out. And so there have been times when I have thought, like, okay, everybody's accepting me for who I am and what I am and the lifestyle that I've chosen. And then I just find out that's like, nope, we're not there yet. So I would say the past couple of years have been good. But yeah, it's a constant battle within my own family, from my side. And it's also a constant battle from my husband's side as well. And although I think initially they were more accepting of me than my own family was of him, when I started going over there, it was like, oh, okay, he's marrying an American girl. This is really exciting because American culture is very, held to a high esteem in the Middle East. And so when I went over there for the first time and I took my headscarf off, Jacob was like, yeah, I know where this is going, but I took my headscarf off for the first time. They sat back and they said, I thought you were American. I said, yeah, I am American. Why don't you have blonde hair? Do you dye it? Why are your eyes brown? I wasn't American enough. My hair wasn't blonde. My eyes were not blue. My skin was not milk. I looked like them. And that wasn't what they had expected. That wasn't what they had hoped for. They hoped that their grandchildren would be blonde. They hoped that their grandchildren would have blue eyes. And so it was like it was a disappointment to them for me to look like them. I wasn't going to, I guess, essentially whitewash them like they had hoped. And so, that's something that has been difficult from both sides of the family. So I have had to, in some regards, prove that, nope, I'm just Angela. Like I'm still that, Angela that you grew up with. Just because I'm Muslim now doesn't mean that I'm a totally different person. In a lot of ways I am, but I think that going over there, I always have to prove, like, yeah, I am American. Americans can be anything, like, and it doesn't have to be blonde. It doesn't have to be blue eyes. Americans are everything. So that's just a constant battle that I am still working on. So.
Whoa. Thank you. Thank you for going deep and giving us those both sides like that. That was a lot. I remember my mother telling me stories about young ladies that they would send. My aunt, my cousin Chris' mother, actually, my Aunt Kay, was sent off to one of those places where you play like they're not pregnant, and then they come back and where's the baby? Yeah. You all have shared a lot of yourselves, and I really appreciate that, because this is these are the conversations that I needed in order to heal. People have to know what's going on. It's not the Band-Aid, it's yanking that Band-Aid off and showing. Yeah. Eric, you touched on it earlier, but was it fixed after the European trip? Did you face any other racist experiences growing up? And I have a two-party with you, because we're going over to the last question. And so I want to ask, did that continue? I'm imagining it did, because the world we live in some type of way, even if it was not immediate family. But then the second part is, what would now Eric say to your younger self then? And so I want to know, did you experience any other racism after the European trip?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think things healed up with my grandfather and my mother after that. So I mean, that was good. As a matter of fact, a couple of years later, my grandfather came over and stayed with us for a little while. Got to revisit America, as it were. And then he passed away a little while after. So yeah, I mean, that was pretty much the end of that story. However, I did get married myself, and to a white woman, and even when I proposed, she kind of balked for a moment, kind of thinking, okay, how's the family going to react to this, and did not expect it was going to go very well. But to their credit, they opened their arms and been very polite to me. But in the 10 years that we've been married, there've been this long series of microaggressions that just seem to like spring up, like during Thanksgiving dinner, and it's like, do I want to blow up Thanksgiving dinner right now? No, I don't. I got to let this slide. And because these are folks from Macomb County, Trump supporters, and they just can't believe what all the liberals are doing. Don't you remember what Martin Luther King said? Didn't he just had these peaceful sit-ins and no one ever complained, and he got everything done? Why don't you do that? Now, that's going to take a little longer to explain. But to your other question, what would I tell my younger self? I remember, trying to fit in. I was born in Detroit, and this was in the 70s, and this was it was a different world. Coleman Young was mayor, and Black Power was everywhere, and the city was still thriving. It's not like it is today. And then we moved out to the suburbs, when the getting was good. And a lot of Black folks in Detroit, if they had the money, they moved to Southfield or Oak Park. And, that's where all the Black middle class folks this area live now. And, race wasn't really in the forefront of my mind, but I do remember trying to be kind of like a chameleon, trying to fit in with, whatever was around me at the time. And never quite pulling it off. And I think if I could go back and tell myself anything, I don't know that I would have listened, but I'd say, don't worry about it. You be you. You know, these people have to adapt to you. You don't have to try to be like them.
That's powerful advice. I would have told myself something very, very similar. Kama, what would you have told your younger self if you had the opportunity? Or what would you tell your younger self if you have the opportunity?
I think because of having the identity navigation and issues for so often, I think it would be I was trying to, like Eric said, fit in all the time in various places. I think it would be don't try to fit in, I almost cussed. Be as unique as you can be. Like, be all that uniqueness that you are, and stop trying to conform, for sure. Because that's how I feel like I move now, in confidence with who I am, regardless of me fitting or not in various places. And I really wish that, especially like tweens, like moving from elementary to middle school, I wish they would just have like the confidence of a mediocre white man. Even, isn't that like a ongoing joke? Like, can you just have that much confidence? Even beyond that would be great. And so I would tell almost every 11, 12, 13-year-old, no, just be that confident at least, because you deserve to be whatever you want to be. Yeah, thanks for asking.
That's real. Thank you for that real answer. And I felt you when you almost slipped and cussed too. I felt you. I was right there with you. Jen, if you can give any advice to your younger self, what would it be?
And I think it's just so simple. It's just like, you're beautiful. Like, you are. There are just so many times where I would like dye my hair all these blonde. I put all this blonde in, and I would just stare at myself in the mirror and be like, hi, why is my nose like this? It's not Asian enough. It's like too white. Like, why is my skin this dark? Like, but now it's not. In the winter, now it has a yellow tinge. Like, you're ugly. Like, that was something like I would think to myself all the time. And I just would like take myself by the shoulders, and I probably would have listened to an older me, but no one else. It'd just be like, you're beautiful, and your family is beautiful. And like, you don't have to be ashamed. Like, you know, you're just beautiful.
That's dope. That's dope. Angela, if you can tell any advice to your younger self, what would it be?
I would tell myself to be patient and to accept myself for who I am and all those unique attributes that make me special. And to know that I will find my people, I will find my place. You just be patient.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Brother Jacob, same question.
Yeah, similar to what other folks have said, you know, love yourself. There's so much I want to say right now and unpack. Love yourself. And I'd also say, you know, think about being mixed race. One thing I want to talk about was like anti-blackness, proximity to whiteness, and how we as fair-skinned people can use our privilege that comes along with that. And it's hard to even say that word privilege, but I would say, yeah, privileges that come along with that too. So I would say to my young self, be authentically you, love yourself, be patient, take time to heal, and use what privilege you have. And I just want to throw in there, because I know we're about to wrap up and I don't want to take it off. I'm just thinking a lot about mixed raceness, anti-blackness, proximity to whiteness, and this conversation around, like, I think Angela and Cameron were touching on, like, you know, genetics. And like, I know we didn't go too much down that trail, but I'm clear in terms of like race and racism, like we're racialized society, that mixed race or biracial people is an ultimate fear to white privilege and white supremacy. In the little that I know about how the melanin gene works, right? What gives us the darker hue of skin, and what happens when white folks and BIPOC people create beautiful children. and that there's like a threat to whiteness that comes along with that. So I didn't want to leave without saying that. But it's clear to me, and I wrote in the chat, like there's so much unpacking that we as biracial people kind of need to do to, you know, further this conversation. So I'm thankful to be a part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all. We definitely have to have a part two. We usually do things like that with important topics that we can't just condense everything within just this small amount of time. But you all brought it, like for real, for real. My mind is like going, like these are like movies, books, documentaries. It's so many different things that should go out. Like, and I mean that, like, honestly, a poem, okay, you have Affinity Group coming, yeah, definitely. Multiple poems, songs, books. I'm reminded of the movie Imitation of Life. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with that, but she, young girl, she identified as white because she was able to pass what they called it back then. She had a Black mother. Awesome movie. Makes me cry every time I see it. But it's just those dynamics of, as long as mother stays in the shadows, then I can get away with this life, which was more fulfilling and more safe and more rewarding. And it's sad that it's like that. Just lifting up in Kalamazoo County, the biggest homeless population is single Black mothers, and that's an atrocity. So in 2021, when we have things like that, then it's no wonder people scramble to date outside their race for a whole different purpose outside of love. And that's a whole nother thing that I look forward to discussing even more in part two. Kama, Jacob, I will be leaning on y'all to be like leads on like really bringing this back together. I have all you all's emails, so I look forward to having y'all and maybe an additional 2 people or something. But I just really love what you all brought to the table, to the discussion. And so, yeah, you want to say something, Jacob?
Oh, not necessarily right now, but
okay. But you're just saying.
You were talking about love, right? And we
Yeah.
were talking about mixed race, anti-Blackness, and proximity to whiteness, and why some individuals choose to be in relationship to whiteness and what comes along with that. But
that's right.
We're gonna have to save that. Yeah,
we gonna get on it. I need one word from everybody, and we usually don't even do that, but today I really just, if y'all don't mind, I really would like to end this Truth Talks with a feeling word. I feel empowered, just listening to you all and learning. Yeah, and feel free to just jump in.
Before this, I felt vulnerable, and now I feel more liberated. Thank you.
I feel seen and heard.
Yeah, I wanted to say like I feel supported. That doesn't feel the right word, but to be having this conversation with other individuals who have that lived experience with being mixed race gives a feeling of sense of like support, community, which feels good. I'm looking forward to taking this conversation offline too, getting even deeper.
I was gonna say connected. It just makes me feel at home.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just feel a little more free. I feel like sometimes the stuff just lives in us. We don't get to talk about it that much. So thank you for that freedom today.
Absolutely. And I want to tell y'all, this was a comment from Keisha Janae, who said, I just want to thank you all for this conversation. As a mixed woman, this conversation has made me think so wow. I appreciate y'all's story. Thank you again. and she asked if can part 2 be 2 hours, and I believe so. Let's do it. Let's do it. So there we are. I really appreciate y'all. Thank you so much, everybody. Eric, thank you for your patience and hanging in there and then bringing it when you like, yeah, you did that. Thank you all. Kama, I have to say thank you so much for pushing to really have this as a topic and a discussion. Brother Jacob, always just showing up and sharing your lived experience. Angela, so great to meet you. And I mean, you just, boom. Virtual hug. And so I don't even want to call it vulnerable. I'm going to call it real. Thank you for being so real, all of you, being so real and so transparent. That's it. Let's schedule part 2 very soon. All right, y'all. Peace.